It began with restless nights and constant itching. Noah would wake up covered in red welts, convinced he had bedbugs. His father, Oscar, pored over countless articles online, learning everything there was to know about these nocturnal pests. Desperate to find a solution, he sought an expert's professional help. But once the expert saw those bedbugs, his face turned pale, and he said, "These are not ordinary bedbugs. We need to leave your room now." Oscar and his wife weren't too pleased with all this chaos in their house, especially with their little boy, Noah, around. None of the researchers spoke a word after hearing what these things in Oscar's bed really were. At first sight, it just seemed to be bed bugs, but after a thorough examination, they realized there was much more to it. But what was so dangerous? Why was the expert in such a panic? And why did they leave the house instantly? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Like any other young kid, Noah was afraid of what may or may not be hiding under his bed. For that reason, he checked under his bed every morning, but he'd not see anything under his bed, but he did see something on it. He had no idea what it was, or that things would become much worse from here on. Noah was shocked and immediately ran downstairs. He yelled for his parents, but they didn't immediately respond. When he finally got their attention, he told them about his discovery. They didn't believe him at first, but when they saw the fear in his eyes, they went upstairs with him. And now it wasn't just Noah who was in shock. His parents, Oscar and Hilly, were also totally blown away by this. Oscar thought he was dealing with a familiar problem here, but they looked slightly different than bedbugs. He slowly stretched out his hand to touch it, but Noah yelled, "Dad, no, don't do that. You don't know if it's safe." Oscar and Hilly decided to call an expert, not only to reassure Noah, but also to have the insects removed as soon as possible. Noah was right about them not touching it. It was better to have experts deal with it. The expert arrived quickly. Less than 15 minutes after they had made the call, he was already knocking on their door. Oddly enough, he didn't want to go upstairs right away. He wanted the family to describe their find as detailed as possible, and Oscar did as he was told. When the expert heard the description of the find, he was shocked, but he didn't explain why. He just asked if he could go upstairs right now, because there was little time. Suddenly, he seemed in a hurry. Noah could tell that something serious was going on, and he was very scared. He had every reason to be. The expert stepped courageously into the room and carefully looked at the bed with a flashlight. Without saying anything, he kept checking the bed for several minutes while the family waited in suspense. They craved answers, or at least more clarity, but suddenly they heard a loud sound. The expert was screaming in horror. He had just been so quiet and concentrated, doing his job, and now he suddenly screamed as if he were facing his greatest fear. Oscar squeezed Noah close, telling him everything was going to be okay. But why did the expert scream like that? What had happened in the bed? The family waited for the expert to come out of the room and explain what was going on, but he didn't do that. He stayed there, leaving the rest in the dark. Oscar wondered what could be going on. He was slowly losing his patience because if it was really that bad, he needed to know immediately. The expert finally opened the bedroom door but avoided eye contact with the family. This is absurd, Oscar thought. He lost his temper and walked over to the man, demanding that he at least say what he saw and what made him scream. But the expert walked away, snapping at Oscar, "I need backup, leave me alone." But this only raised more questions on Oscar's side. Wasn't this his house? And didn't it concern him more than the expert himself? Hilly agreed with him. However, she was a bit calmer than Oscar and kindly asked the expert if he could tell them what was going on and if they could do anything to help. But his answer would only make them even more worried. The expert preferred Hilly's approach, and he finally looked at her. He clearly made an effort to speak to her and Oscar, looking worriedly in Noah's direction. No matter how hard he tried to find the right words, he hardly managed to speak. He stuttered and tripped over his words. Hilly wondered, these could not just be case on simple bedbugs, right? Meanwhile, the expert finally called for backup. He tried to explain everything over the phone, but Oscar and Hilly noticed that he had to repeat himself several times. That could only mean that his backup didn't understand much of it either. Finally, the man hung up, waiting for the others to come their way. Oscar, Hilly, and Noah were asked to wait in the living room until the others arrived. They hesitantly obliged, but they wondered what the expert actually meant by backup. Did he ring his boss or a colleague? And what would happen when they arrived? Not much later, the backup arrived at an entire team. Oscar and Hilly watched in disbelief as men in white suits entered their son's room, moving furniture and gathering around the bed. As the team uncovered Noah's bed, even they appeared stunned. Red bed bugs covered the sheets, far more than initially suspected. Some members left with samples, others sealed off the bedroom entirely. The family wasn't given any information, only left with a growing sense of unease. Then came the shocking decision. They called the police. Oscar was stunned. Was it truly that serious? Though he tried to reason with the expert, his efforts were dismissed. Soon, the house was swarming with police officers and scientists. Oscar and Hilly, pushed to the side, focused on staying calm for Noah's sake. But something was clearly very wrong. A lead officer arrived and offered a few vague reassurances before joining the others. Then, a quiet discovery shifted the mood entirely. The experts whispered among themselves, and Oscar noticed one officer's stunned expression. The officer's wide-eyed shock sent Oscar over the edge. He pushed into the group and demanded to know what was going on. As he raised his voice, the officer stepped back, shocked. Then one said, "Sir, stay there. You need to lay on the ground and don't move." Oscar was stunned. What was happening? With no explanation, Oscar raised his hands and got on his knees. Hilly and Noah looked on in terror. Was he being arrested? For what? The police claimed the family could be infected with something. Oscar couldn't believe it. Then he saw Noah crying just outside the house. As he moved toward his son, officers pulled their guns on him. He panicked and ran forward. Oscar was immediately forced down. Thankfully, Noah was gently comforted by another officer. The family was then separated, each placed in different police cars. Confused and scared, Oscar was left with more questions than answers. Soon, another group in white suits entered the house. Hours passed before anyone addressed Oscar. When someone finally approached, they said, "We need to take you and your family with us, sir." What the heck? Was he being arrested? Oscar could hear his son crying in the other car. Looking at his house, now surrounded by cops and people in hazmat suits, he felt like he was stuck in a nightmare. As the vehicle pulled away, Oscar noticed the driver wasn't a police officer, but someone in a white suit. He tried asking questions, but the driver said nothing. Oscar's anxiety grew. Where were they taking him, and why? After a 2-hour ride, they arrived at an airport. Oscar barely had time to process it before being escorted into a helicopter. As the helicopter flew over unfamiliar terrain, a man finally told Oscar, "We're almost there, just 5 minutes." When the helicopter landed, the area looked like a military base, but something about it felt off. Before he could ask more, a team in white suits grabbed him and led him into a building. Oscar was locked in a sterile cell. 2 hours passed before someone entered the room. The man, dressed in full protective gear, introduced himself as Alex. He claimed to be part of a special task force. Though polite, Alex gave little away, saying only that the situation required extreme caution. Oscar demanded to know where his family was. Alex looked concerned, hesitated, and finally said, "I have to tell you something." Oscar panicked. "What? What happened?" he shouted. He could barely control himself. Alex handed him a glass of water, urging him to calm down. Alex revealed that Noah had fallen ill after arriving at the facility, likely due to the infestation in his bed. Oscar was overwhelmed with questions. What kind of infestation? How serious was it? Alex didn't offer details. He only said the illness and its source were top secret. Another suited man arrived and conducted medical tests. After a long and stressful hour, the results showed Oscar was not infected. Alex informed him he could now visit his son, but only in a hazmat suit. As Oscar walked down the long hallway, he bombarded Alex with questions about the illness. Was it caused by the bed bugs? Alex remained vague, hinting that some things were best left unsaid. Inside the room, Oscar saw Noah lying still, hooked up to machines. He looked exhausted. Alex explained it was a newly discovered illness, with only 3 known cases globally. Alex suggested using Oscar's blood in a transfusion. It might help Noah's immune system respond. Oscar agreed instantly, but they had to confirm blood type compatibility. Tests revealed a match, and Oscar was relieved. Once a bag was filled with Oscar's blood, they connected it to Noah. Now it was just a matter of waiting. Oscar asked again about the mysterious infestation, hoping for answers. Soon after, Hilly arrived, and a white, sweethered negative test meant she could join them. Oscar embraced her, and together they sat by Noah's bed, speaking to him softly, unsure if he could hear them. She had many of the same questions, but Alex's answers remained vague. No one could offer promises. When Alex and the team left the room, Oscar followed, determined to get the full story. Alex agreed to explain, but only if Oscar signed a non-disclosure contract. Oscar didn't hesitate. He needed to know the truth. With the contract signed, Alex revealed the facts. The infestation involved mutated bed bugs with a rare and potentially dangerous bite. Children were particularly vulnerable, and the virus they carried might be highly contagious. That's why such extreme measures were taken. This was the first case in the country. They needed to identify the source and prevent a wider outbreak. Then Oscar remembered his friend from Brazil had recently stayed the night in Noah's room. That friend had just returned from the rainforest. It was possible he unknowingly carried the bugs in his belongings. Now that he understood the situation, Oscar asked anxiously about Noah. Is he doing better? He needed hope. The doctors had good news. Noah was improving. The transfusion had worked, and he had just woken up. Oscar was overwhelmed with relief and rushed to see his son. They embraced. Noah looked far better already. He'd need to stay overnight for observation, but if his condition held steady, he could go home the next day. Oscar and Hilly stayed close, keeping him safe and comforted. The following day, they asked about returning home, but Alex explained their house was still under lockdown and would require deep cleaning. Instead, a temporary home was arranged for the family until it was safe to return.